Howdy, Devin Rose, Lionheart Catholic. Wanted to talk with you about Urbit today. Urbit is an interesting project, and I think that Catholics should know about it and even use it. Um, it's urbit.org is the main site. What is it? Urbit's a peer-to-peer computer program that creates an operating system on top of the internet. We'll delve into that a little bit in a sec. So you set up your Urbit to run on your own computer or a computer running in the cloud, like DigitalOcean or AWS, and it can then talk to other people who are running the Urbit program on their computers. It's almost like with Bitcoin is peer-to-peer sending of Bitcoin back and forth. Urbit's kind of similar, except mainly right now it's chat that you're doing. You have group chats and private messages, but there's other applications being built, as we'll see. So what problem does Urbit solve? Well, many of you probably haven't thought about this, but it'll make sense, I think, when I describe it. The vast majority of stuff we do on the computer nowadays uses centralized apps and systems owned by big companies. All of our data, all our interaction is stored in the servers of those big companies and are at the whim of those companies. So you make a Facebook account, and Facebook adds you to some rows in their databases, starts collecting information on you based on who you connect with as friends, groups that you join, posts that you like. This is how Facebook makes all their money. They develop a pretty accurate view of who you are politically, religiously, interests, then they can sell ads to advertising companies based on those interests and demographics. But as we've seen, if you post something that goes against Facebook's woke agenda, you will get fact checked, censored, warned, your post will be deleted. And, Facebook chooses to show you which posts they want to, not necessarily all of the posts that your friends make. And finally, if you choose to leave Facebook, well, you leave with nothing. They have your social connections, all those, friends that you made, all your interactions and data. You don't get to take that with you to any other virtual system. Same could be said for Twitter, which isn't really your Twitter, right? It's theirs, or your YouTube channel, your Instagram, everything else, centralized servers that we log into, and we exist as rows in databases on those big company machines. With Urbit, though, using your own computer, you run Urbit on it, and all the data is stored right there. You can take all that data, move it to a different computer anytime you want. It's all yours. You own it. So it's its own little microcosm. And every person in the microcosm has their own little castle and talks to the other castles there. And no one can cancel you on Urbit. No one can spy on you, provided you take some very basic precautions, and you own all your data. So what can Urbit do right now? Let's see here. Look at this. Urbit is primarily a chat app right now. You can make groups centered on different interests, people who like soccer, or organizations. Maybe you're all members of the Southeast Texas Bass Fishing Alliance. So you make a group and basically chat with each other. And in that way, it's similar to Slack or Discord, some of these other chat applications you've seen. But people are also developing applications that run natively on Urbit to where you could live more and more of your virtual life online inside of Urbit and thus inside of your own castle, right? And not out there at the whim of other companies. For example, a Bitcoin app has already been written where you could then pay other people in Urbit using Bitcoin. And many of the apps that we use the regular web for today could be written to work within Urbit. Think calendar applications, note-taking, productivity apps, games, Patreon, right, where people can, basically pay you to be a member or to be a patron of whatever you're doing. Currently the chat apps that we use allow big tech companies to spy on us, to mine all of our communication data. Much better to use Urbit for such things. So even just as it is now, right, where it's, quote unquote, just a chat app, it has a utility. So, how does Urbit work? It's organized where the computers in Urbit are organized structurally into galaxies, stars, and planets. That's just a metaphor. But galaxies and stars are the infrastructure governance nodes that help the planets, which is like individual people like me, discover one another for that peer-to-peer communication and route system updates. So the Urbit operating system gets updated regularly. And more those updates can be done over the air, OTA, meaning seamlessly pushed to your planet, and then it updates the software. So planets are the primary way that people use Urbit. You obtain a planet, and that's your identity as you use Urbit on your computer. The planet's the equivalent of the castle that I mentioned above, just a different set of imagery. The planet can either be an Ethereum NFT, non-fungible token, which is what mine is, or it can be what's called a layer 2 or L2 planet. So for efficiency's sake, some months back, Urbit changed it to where you could have a planet that it's kind of like Urbit internally is keeping track of what those planets are, and all those transactions roll up in a batch to the Ethereum blockchain, but they're not individual NFTs on Ethereum that you could send around. But the point is, your planet identity is not just a row in some company's database. It's rather something you cryptographically own. It cannot be taken from you unless you lose your private key, for example, to your planet. But that's the same for all crypto. If you lose your private key or someone gets access to your private key, well, they can take all your Bitcoin. So same kind of caveat applies. So why Urbit for Catholics? Well, our Catholic beliefs are increasingly under attack, right, from the woke Marxist mob. The Overton window continues to shift radically to the left. Many of our Catholic teachings are now considered evil and unacceptable. With Urbit, you can actually talk about your Catholic faith without being canceled or censored. We as Catholics should support projects that help human beings to flourish, to increase their freedom to choose the good and to do good. And Urbit is one such project. I have a Catholic group on Urbit, for example. It's a private one. So you can have a public group or a private group. Mine's a private group with other fellow Catholics. We chat, and we don't have any fear that we're going to get snooped upon or attacked. So how do you join? Well, the easiest way is to use something called Port. P as in potato, O-R-T, and I'll share a link to that. It makes it where it's pretty simple to get started. Depends on whether you have Mac or Windows. And if you do decide you like it, you can run Port as a comet. So a comet is like sort of an ephemeral identity. It's less than a planet, but it allows you to interact. If you decide to like it, you should get a planet, and there's ways of getting a planet that's not too difficult. It's easiest to pay someone else to host your Urbit. All the companies that I've seen that offer hosting services are good actors in the ecosystem. And for $10 or $20 a month, they give you a planet, they do all the hosting for you on a computer. And then you just log into that computer, basically, and you're up and running. If you're more technically inclined, you can run your own Urbit on your computer or a cloud computer. That's what I do. But to do that, you need to at least be semi-comfortable using a terminal or command line. Urbit's still early enough where like things go wrong and you've got to do some debugging. It's getting better and better. Still the case though. So I run my Urbit on a cloud server. I have a particular domain. I then just go to that domain. I'm able to log into my planet. And I also use what's called, there's a company called Uckbar. And Uckbar has actually made a mobile app called Escape or Escape. And you then, with a native mobile app, can actually access, let me see, all of your different groups on Urbit and do everything that you would do from the computer. So I know it's kind of hard to see, but there's chat groups there. So Urbit's very actively developed. The company that primarily drives it is called Tlon, T-L-O-N. This is tlon.io, and they also are going to offer hosting, but it's more and more decentralized all the time. And there's other companies popping up, making their own apps for it, etc. If you're a developer, you can actually learn the particular programming languages behind Urbit. It has its own unique programming languages, which are very cool from a software development standpoint. And then they have a annual conference called Assembly. The previous one was in Austin, Texas. Unfortunately, I didn't get to go, but the next one's in Miami, and you can see who the speakers are and whatnot. They have a YouTube channel, etc. So I see Urbit as the end game, if you will, for a better way of doing the internet, a way of taking our sovereignty back from all these big tech companies who don't like us and want to control us, and are used by the powers that be to influence people and all sorts of different ways. This is like Urbit's sort of the closer to the original vision of the internet and more like what it was early on. I'm old enough to where I was using the internet in the mid 90s when it was just getting going kind of to the public. So this is more like that, and it's still nascent, but it's a very cool project. So I hope you will join, and if you do, shoot me a message and I can tell you how to join my Catholic group. There's some other Catholic groups too, run by other Catholics. I'm in, I think, all the Catholic groups. Everyone can have their own one. It's all open. So hope you appreciate this, and look forward to seeing you on Urbit.